Hello and welcome to the Iron Maiden. My name is Abby and today I'm going to show you how I tackle the Kassai matchup. Kassai is a very interesting hero. As you can see, she has mediocre, consistent damage, speed, and a little bit higher on the defense side. Where she really shines is her high consistency and fairly high flexibility. So this hero can, every single turn, get 12 to 14 value. She also has some combo potential. She has a few different builds and she's flexible in gameplay as well. Where she's really weak is in disruption. She finds it hard to play any disruptive cards, and almost all of her disruption is generic or not included at all. So here's a bunch of cards that pretty much every Kassai will run. Kassai runs a bunch of pumping cards. Most of these are actions that also give the sword some sort of miniature on hit like a copper, but there are also reactions such as Blade Flurry. She also has to run a bunch of Go Again cards, which are roughly split between actions and reactions. So you have cards like Blade Runner, but you also have cards like Unsheath, which is an attack action, or a non-attack action. You also have some attacks in Kassai, which is fairly interesting for a warrior. Nourishing Emptiness is played in just about every Kassai deck. They can banish the spare ones out of the graveyard, which means they can get up to 3 7 dominates over the course of a game. Sometimes Kassai also run Command and Conquer, and recently some of them also run Blanche. It just depends on how aggressive the deck is. All Kassai decks run D-Reacts. The number is different depending on how aggressive or defensive they are. This can change either in sideboarding or in deck building, but I've never seen a Kassai deck with 0 D-Reacts. And Kassai has excellent armor. She has 3 2 blocks, usually her head, chest, and arms. The chest and arms also block an additional 1, and she has dynamos to block 1 almost every single turn. So she has upwards of 14 block over the course of a game, depending on how dynamos checks out. Very strong. So here's the spectrum of Kassai decks as I see it. Now, I'm not a Kassai player, but from playing against Kassai, you can see that on the defensive side, they can play more and more D-Reacts. So they'll first start playing Sync, then maybe Command and Conquer for some extra disruption into aggressive decks, and then they might start tipping into things like Fate Foreseen. On the aggressive side, some Kassais run Stroke of Foresight as a pretty good reaction. Then they start getting into Draw Swords, so they can get the draw a card, free resource, aggressive plan. And some really aggressive decks run Take It on the Chin as well, which is basically a D-React that has more aggressive value and less defensive value. And in the middle of these two decks, you can get a balanced Kassai deck. So these decks try and play a little bit of each, and they change in sideboarding depending on the matchups. And we have to know how to beat each of these types of decks, or every single Kassai deck along this spectrum. So in the very defensive style decks, you need to exploit their bad hands. Some of these Kassai decks will draw hands that have multiple D-Reacts, or attack actions, or no go again for the sword. So they're not great, and they kind of just send a few damage and then pass. We need to do less and wait for these bad hands, and then try and punish them once we've set up. On the fairly aggressive side, on the right hand, you need to exploit your opponent's low blue count. All Kassais have a slightly low blue count because they play so many yellows. And we need to play more aggressive. So in general, they're still going to have lots of 3 blocks, but they're going to want to block less. If they're playing more in the middle, you need to watch how your opponent blocks. Do they block out physical and take arcane? Do they block everything? Do they only block when their hand's bad? And then you need to counterplay those habits. So for example, if your opponent is taking arcane damage but blocking physical, you can exploit that with maybe Succumb to Temptation or Creepers. Whereas if your opponent is blocking everything, you can move into Setting Up. Or if your opponent is only blocking when their hand is good, you can take more setup turns and try and find them caught on a bad hand. Here's some special interactions that Kassai has. These are kind of warrior interactions in general, but they're most prominent in Kassai, I feel. So Dynamos should be a 1 block every turn generally in a Kassai deck, which means that Flail is kind of cancelled out by the Dynamo. So you shouldn't swing your Flail unless either you need to lose life, like you want to because of, say, a Deathly Wail trigger, or if you have seen that your opponent doesn't have Dynamos up. For example, if they blocked last turn and failed to swing 2 times. If your opponent keeps saving their Dynamos for the Flail, and you don't swing Flail, you're cancelling out both of them, which is pretty good. So your weapon, which you maybe were going to swing, maybe didn't really care about, kind of cancels out their Dynamos. So if you, for example, swing a 7 attack with Go Again, and they take 1 because they save the Valiant for Flail, just don't swing your Flail. You'll get your value out of the 1 that you got through before. The other card to look out for is Provoke. This is Kassai's really disruptive card. It forcibly takes a card of your choice out of your hand. There's not a lot you can do about it, and you can't really play around it in any kind of way. So it's really best just to keep it in the back of your mind when they have maybe 2 cards or they have a resource and a card. I think it could be Provoke, but it's not worth stressing over constantly. At least it blocks the sword for you when you select an attack action or a non-attack action. Even though it's probably going to destroy your hand, you can set up a little bit more and try again next turn. And then finally for Kassai, the tokens. Kassai can make lots of tokens, and she gets each of them by hitting you with her swords. I don't often think very hard about these tokens. I don't have a general rule about blocking out gold but letting copper through. I just think I block out if my hand makes sense to block, if I'm setting up, or if it's just not very good. And I take damage and let them get tokens if my hand is worth keeping. These tokens aren't massively important in this matchup. If your opponent gets a gold or 2 and they draw some cards that could maybe put them ahead, they're probably not going to get enough copper out of you to blood on her hands. And a Vigor token every now and then is to be expected. There's not a lot you can do to stop it. If they do manage to buy a sellsword, you probably should kill it unless you can threaten your opponent's life total. For example, if your opponent is within killing range at 7 or so, they're going to have to block with a few cards, which means it's pretty unlikely that they can actually use their sellsword. But if they make 2, or if it's early game, you probably need to kill it. They're too valuable if your opponent can keep a solid hand, and they're too valuable over the course of many turns. So what are we going to do now? So here's our main board sort of stuff. We need to play a little bit flexibly, like I said before, which means that if they're being aggressive, we can use our spare attacks to block, and then use our Malefics and our Deathly Wails to add consistency, like a normal aggro matchup. If they're being more defensive, we need to block and set up. We can use cards like Deathly Wail and a Shadow non-attack to chain some Rune Gates, and Malefic, of course, helps with that too. So these few cards are, of course, really important to every Vynnset matchup, but using them differently is important to remember. I also use Tunic in this matchup instead of Dyadic Carapace, since without Tunic it's difficult to beat defensive decks. You really want Tunic to activate your creepers, and Dyadic Carapace is good against aggro, but it's not a game changer. So it's worth putting in Tunic as a hedge because it does enough to justify itself, whereas Dyadic is kind of coin flippy. And then the sideboard cards. So Chains of Mephetis, I've been singing this card's praises for a few weeks now. It's really good against aggro Kassai because they play cards like Draw Swords, and sometimes they rely on drawing a card to get max value out of their hand. And it's okay against defensive Kassai because it still helps you set up, and it's still a 3-block non-attack and everything like that. Sakama's in the same sort of boat, It's really good against aggro because they're probably not going to block the arcane, but it's decent against defensive because it can still give go again to your attacks or block for 3, and it's a non-attack as well. Revel in Runeblood is pretty much required to beat the defensive decks. You probably won't be able to double, triple Runegate enough times without Revel to win. And it's pretty good against aggro, or it's kind of okay against aggro because it's 4 arcane damage that they probably can't / won't block. And then Reduced to Rune Champ. It's good against all Kassai, and it changes depending on how your opponent plays. So if they're aggressive, you're probably just going to use it when you draw it, get your value out of it. If they're defensive, you're going to arsenal it, look for a powerful turn, and then use it to get enough rune chance to start that turn. And then we've got our gameplay video. This is a fairly interesting game I played, which is what inspired me to make this Kassai video. So you can see I've got my normal stuff. I switch Chains of My Feathers in and take out 2 of the Succumb to Temptations, just because I have enough sideboard cards already. We can Dirge on turn 1 and Arsenal go again, Keeper go again. That's pretty good. Drawing 3 attacks is okay. Depends on what they're going to be doing with their hand, depending on how good this will be. They think really hard about this turn, and they do something really interesting, which at first I thought was a mistake, and they pass. Now this makes me think that they're hyper-defensive Kassai, and they had multiple D-reacts, and they just wanted to get value out of them. If they pitch a Sink Below and swing for 2, well, they got 2 value out of that Sink Below. If they Arsenal it, they could get 4. So I decided I'm going to set up back. Banish, pass. I have lots of rune chance now. I still have lots of attacks in hand. Turns out their hand was totally normal and able to be converted into lots of value. And this confuses me, so I stop and ask them what they were doing. They say that they wanted to see if I would attack them or not. So they were testing me like I was testing them to see, is this Vynnset going to set up, or are they going to try and aggro me? So I decide here I'm going to early face Purgatory to get the last card out of their hand from the second attack. I can use Puppetry here. I've got Tunic up, so it means I can swing a second attack, go into next turn with 2 rune chance after closing the chain. I do have a fair bit of blood debt, so I do want to clear that. They are blocking the arcane, well, what they can. And they're using some of that armor, or powerful armor early. Here we can swing Ruin, which does risk putting another blood debt in our arsenal, or in our banish zone, but it's the better attack in our hand, and another blood debt's probably not bad. If we get a Binstant, that's really good. Instead we get a Deathly Whale, which is also fine. We draw a pretty mediocre hand. Even though we have lots of blood debt, this is still probably a hand where we just set up. Could also be a hand where you swing Whale to test your opponent one last time to check what are they doing. Arseling Dirge is pretty safe. That's the one I go with because I want to see, are they actually going to fatigue me, or are they just trying for value? It appears that they are actually trying to fatigue me, or at least block out till I set up. So they're using a lot of their armor early here, which is definitely good to see. It means that they want to pressure us now. So they are still trying to kill us. They're not completely fatiguing, but definitely a balanced approach. Arseling Dirge is good. Taking 3 blood debt is getting a bit tiring. Drawing a Cull is good because it means that we can, of course, banish that and hopefully get it back out. We have Beseech to guarantee we get it back out, in fact. Here they have a Kassai effect. could block it out heavily. I am expecting a reaction, but I decided to just let them show me they have it. Like I said, don't really think it's worth dedicating everything to stopping these tokens. They don't have go again though, so just arsenaling a card. Now we do have only one rune champ, but we can luckily dirge into 3. Beseeching gives us access to Deathly Wail into Cull, or in this case I choose Deathly Delight into Cull because I want a little bit of extra life, and I will have 1 rune chant next turn because of the Malefic. So I thought this was worth it. I don't know if that's strictly right. The other benefit is that we still have a Deathly Wail and a 2-cost Rune Gate in our Banish Zone. So next turn, if we draw a Shadow Puppetry, for example, we can swing both for an easy double Rune Gate. So there are definitely benefits on both sides, depending on would you rather be aggressive now or later. I choose it's better to kind of set up a little bit. I choose to cull before they sink because they'll have less information. They don't sink, or they do sink, it doesn't really matter. And we draw a pretty good hand of Malefic, Chains, and some attacks. So preferably I'd like to play the Malefic and the Chains and then pass again. Still getting very low from blood debt. But, you know, I always say, if you just pretend Vynnset starts on 30, you don't have to be upset about all the blood debt you take. And, you know, that's a good way to think about it. We draw a pretty interesting hand that has 1 attack and lots of non-attacks, which is good to see at this point because we have lots of attacks in Banish. They decide to try and draw a card. Possibly they forgot how Chains of Mephetis works. Possibly they just thought it was worth to try and draw. They use an Unsheathed and a Skirmish. So it's a big sword swing here. Unfortunately, his hand's too good to block with, so I'm taking a lot of damage. This game's looking really bad. We're 20 points down, but we've got through most of their armor. They have a Dominate that's going to get them plus Intellect. So we're going to block a little bit of that. It's better to block on this than the sword, because this way my card blocks for 3. Whereas if I had blocked the sword and given it +1, kind of like it only blocked for 2. So we get to send a whale into either. We can use Tunic to Creepers in the Succumb, and that would mean that we would be swinging the 2-cost Rune Gate and then Flail, which is okay. In this case, since they block out, it's looking like what's going to happen. We can also possibly get some interesting things here with the Eloquent Eulogy. If they take this arcane damage, we will get the damage trigger, so we can also get another action point, and we won't have to use Tunic to Succumb, which is lucky, or not lucky, it's kind of to be expected here. They don't block anything else, so we get a free 3 block out of their hand. Then we can use Tunic on Eloquent. So this is turned into a massive turn. If they had blocked out the arcane damage, we probably would have just Flail, Play Moon after, and then Arsenal the Succumb. So it was kind of a modular turn. So now we get to close Chain to make Eloquence, Moon to make an action point, and then swing Flail. We know they have a yellow 3-block in hand, but it is a yellow 3-block they want. It's the Raisin Army. So they do, in fact, use their armor instead of blocking with their Raise. I honestly didn't consider raise a threat here, which is why I left it in their hand. They consider it powerful enough that they want to keep it though. Alright, we draw a Revel, which is certainly good at this late in the game. Like, we're getting to the point where Revel is going to probably threaten lethal, but we don't really have a hand that works yet. We don't have creepers. Well, we have creepers. We don't have Tunic up to use creepers. So we're going to try and put that Revel in Arsenal and get to a point where we can use it to win. If the Revel cannot win us the game, it will be very rough afterwards. We're getting Funeral Moon out here because we just want less blood debt. And of course, Rune Chance for next turn is good too. But we just want less blood debt. It's too risky. Banish a card from the top of their deck. Awesome. We do have Reduced Rune Chant. Excellent draw here. Saves us from a big reaction. They want a gold because they want to make 2 sellswords. That would definitely be powerful, and like I said, it would be probably debilitating. It would probably make us lose this game. So we probably should block it. They've got only 2 go again, but they do threaten, of course, to have reactions, as every warrior does. So we block with one of our attacks, and they don't react, which is good. Means we get to use their reduce on another attack later. And then they think about it really hard. They play their Raisin army. They only get the 1 sellsword, and they attack us. So we can see that they're probably just swinging their sword after this, which is for 2. So it's best off using the reduce here, and if we have to, then we can use the Malefic on the sword. A little bit worried here about In the Swing, which is a 0 for +3. You can only play it if you've swung twice, so it comes in on the second sword. So that would kill us, and the Malefic's not going to win us the game, so I decided it's worth blocking here just in case. They probably would have played it if they had it. Here I have to decide between Sellsword or Kassai. Killing Sellsword gives them lots of tempo, and attacking Kassai probably means they can't use the Sellsword unless they're willing to go down to like 1 or 2. If they had a good enough hand, they could have won this game by taking all the damage and then attacking us with sword, Sellsword, sword again. But they don't have a good enough hand, I guess, so they block out. This works out well for us because it means that we get to draw a better hand, hopefully. We do have a reduce. We don't have an attack, unfortunately. So this has to be a setup turn. This actually would have been a pretty good hand to be fully attacked on. So we can try and get use out of our non-attacks by blocking. It means that we will go into our next turn with Tunic Creeper, which is good. And we also will have this reduced to Rune Chant and lots of Rune Chants. So in this case we have, what's that, 11 block. It's kind of like 10 because the attack's going to pump the sword. That's a lot of block. It's very unlikely they can do 15 damage out of nowhere. They could, but they'd have to have a pretty good hand. Unfortunately, they do get to glint. Nothing we could really do since it was lethal, so we couldn't stop that, but they do get to draw that card from glint. We're getting more and more Rune Chants, which is good. I have to decide here between blocking the Sellsword or blocking the Sword. I choose the sword one because I feel like there has to be a reaction here. I'm worried that I've lost this game, but they don't have it. Like I said, they just have too many dud cards in these balanced or defensive style decks. Their hand probably has multiple D-reacts, or perhaps an attack action that they couldn't really use. So we get to swing, what's this, 13 damage, 8 and 5. So we're threatening lethal by a pretty big margin. It's not going to actually kill them. They have enough block, of course, to survive. But it means that next turn, we can keep our fingers crossed one more time for Revel to pack it up. So they block 2 of it. They either don't have a blue in hand, or they want to keep the blue so that their turn functions. It's usually the latter. Side decks are built to draw exactly 1 blue per turn, otherwise the deck's kind of bad. They can get their Valiant into D-react. So as you can see, Fake Foreseen means that they are probably playing 6, and then the yellow ones for 9 D-reacts. So very, very defensive style deck. We can here use Tunic for creepers to play Revel. We won't get any rune chance, but we will get an action point. Did think about that, decided not worth it. This hand is incredible if we get to keep 2 cards, an attack and any of the non-attacks. Doesn't really matter which one, so it might as well be the Siege, I guess. So they attack. We don't need Machinations. Shadow Puppetry is better. We're going to block, cross their fingers, they haven't got reactions. They do only have a red in pitch, so they only can pump by 3, or in this case 2. We get to live another turn, which means that we get to send a fairly lucky or a fairly powerful turn here. Luckily, we've kept our Quill hand this whole time. So we get 10 and 3. Sorry, 11 and 3, which is probably almost lethal. And then don't forget we have Revel into Flail. That's 5 more damage on the backside. So they're really, really dead. If they did let it hit, we could even Shadow Puppetry into an attack action off the top, and even better for us then. If they had a blue or D-reacts here, we would have needed to play Revel, but it seems that they didn't because they just die. They've only got 9 block in hand. So, as you can see, a fairly interesting game. Shows that you can play dynamically with these warrior decks, although it's always going to be difficult. When they're aggressive, you need to be aggressive back. When they're defensive or balanced, you need to play at their speed a little bit more. If you'd like to check out my comics, there's 2 on the left there. There is 1 more coming, but I've been very busy and Nationals are coming up as well. There's my Twitter account, although I don't really post there. And of course, you can join the Discord in the description below. That's the one I'd recommend most. There's about 120 of us in this Discord now. We're always talking about Vynnset, cheering each other on, answering questions. And it's not just me. There's some excellent players in there who will be happy to answer questions for all of you. So have a nice day and be good.